Got to go back there and get some more. Would you run back there and get the remaining ones off the copier? I'll start this around this side. Checking 1, 2, 3. It's good for me. Okay. Welcome to our Wednesday night Bible study. I was trying to teach our kids on the school bus because I don't know what they get in school. So on the school bus, I try to teach them a thing or two. So I kept showing some of the girls every morning this week how the sunrise is almost lined up exactly with the highway as we point east, because I'm trying to teach them a lesson or two about the equinoxes. So we're coming up on the autumnal equinox, and so I'll talk to them about solstices and equinoxes. They probably still have no clue other than they do know tomorrow is the first official day of fall. I knew we were getting close because that sunrise has been getting closer and closer to straight on horizon down Highway 11. How many of you have been seeing any sunrises? They've been pretty in the last few days. How many of you are ready for the cool front? Yes. Man, it was hot. 100 degrees on the bus and all that dust. And I saw a lot of dust devils out in the fields today as we were doing the rural route. Anyway, I like to talk to them about the equinoxes, the vernal equinox, the autumnal, the winter and summer solstices. But I'm looking forward to change. Everybody got a paper now? So happy fall, everybody. And hope that we get a little rain out of this maybe. I heard there might be some rain chances, so hoping there might be. We are starting our second part of our study of Kingdom Come after having somewhat of a break. Kingdom Come Part 2. Let me remind you of something that we said when we started 1 Kings. 1 Kings and 2 Kings weren't written as really 1 Kings and 2 Kings. They were the work of one author, presumably Jeremiah. The reason you have 1st and 2nd is because they filled up one scroll and had to start another. These animal skin scrolls just don't go on forever and ever, okay? So this is the beginning part of the next scroll. That is why in our lessons, I'm just continuing the session numbers along with tonight is session 13, but we're actually in chapter 1. So an introduction to in chapter 1 to 2 Kings. So we're only going to be looking at one chapter tonight, but I'm going to go ahead and tell you chapters 2 and 3. I'm about halfway through getting the outline as far as where we go along with the dates. I'm about halfway through getting that nailed down. I've already separated them out in assigned chapters, and we were going to go into about the middle part of December, even though technically December starts another teaching quarter, but I assumed I'm in here anyway, so I can have a little leeway to get into the next part. You want me to get you some water? I'll send somebody for water. Can you get Judy water, please? Thank you. Oh, she's got some. Never mind. Never mind. He's coming with water. No, he's got a bottle for her. Is it warm in here? It probably is. I haven't messed with the air conditioner at all. Yeah, it's warm. Turn it to 63. 68. Thank you. All right. Where was I? Oh, so next week the only thing that's hanging me up right now is I'm trying to give catchy titles to these sessions. And I've got about halfway through that, and so I need to finish that before I print that page. But it'd be page 29. So if your last worksheet was page 28, there's a reason for that, why tonight's page 30, right? It's page 30. You will have a 29 forthcoming. I also told you I would complete the most recent lesson we've had, and I haven't done that yet, so I'm going to have that done too. Okay, tonight is sometimes you have to hear it for yourself. This was a terrible title. It was wordy, but I just could not think of really anything else. As a matter of fact, I might, at the end of tonight's study, throw that at y'all and say, what would you have called tonight's lesson? Some people just have to hear it for themselves. What's that mean? Well, you know, you come in to the room with all the other disciples, and they've just seen Jesus, and, oh, you should have been here. Jesus is here. And he got nicknamed Doubting Thomas because he said what? I won't see it, I won't believe it till I see it, right? Some people have to hear it for themselves or see it for themselves. I don't want to just take your word for it. Now, one of my favorite presidential quotes is trust but verify. Okay? Some of y'all could name that president. But trust but verify. In other words, I would like to think I trust you. And if you tell me something, I can go to the bank with it, right? But I think also God knows that if He's given us a discerning mind, we ought to double check things. I need to double check myself. But, in addition to double checking everybody else on what they say, verify, make sure it's substantiated. But sometimes God does give us something that anything God says we ought to believe. Remember the bumper stickers that used to be popular? God said it, I believe it, and that settles it. I had a guy one time that said that needs to be improved. God said it, and whether I believe it or not, that settles it. And I think that's even more true. But if God said it, I need to be able to believe it. You can take that to the bank, right? If God's going to say He's going to do a thing, He's going to do a thing. Now, when we see this story tonight about King Ahaziah, we're going to see some things that he repeats. And it's not until he hears it for himself that things are going to come to light, so to speak. So let's summarize the chapter. Ahab has died. Yes! Right? Now Jezebel's still alive, but she'll die in this 2 Kings, okay? Ahab has died. Moab begins to rebel against Israel. Now something kind of bizarre happens with Ahaziah. Remember what happened? He's up in the upper room. And I don't know why I imagine it. I just think he's kind of in a portico area or a porch area, anywhere you'd have lattice. Certainly the floor wasn't made of lattice. Would you think that? Maybe he leaned up against it and he fell. Okay, and he's injured. And he sends messengers to Baal-zebub, a god of Ekron. So not the true God, but a god, okay? To see if he will recover from his injuries. He wants to know what is his future got in store for him. An angel appears to Elijah to intercept the messengers as they're on their way to Baal-zebub, and tells Elijah, go down and ask these messengers the following question. This is chapter 1, verses 3 and 4. Let me get there. I forgot to open my Bible. 2 Kings 1. If anybody's there, go ahead and read verses 3 and 4 out loud. Baal-zebub. Ekron. Thank you, Karen. Very good. And that might have been why others were hesitating reading. It's got that long name in there. I'm not sure what that is. We just call him Bubba. Baal-zebub. Okay? He's a god of Ekron. Up till the reading of this narrative, I'd never heard of this particular god or Ekron before, so this is news to me too. By the way, as the angel tells Elijah this, giving him the instruction, go to those messengers that Ahaziah is sending, it's a question, isn't it? What he has to tell them is that it's a question. It starts with a question. And then there's a judgment that follows the question. Do you guys feel like I do when I read this? It's kind of I don't want to use the word humor maybe, because there's nothing funny about going to somebody other than God and asking for advice, and certainly nothing funny about the judgment that's going to fall on Ahaziah. but it's just a little bit of way of, it compares to when I may have messed up at work and my employer is going to reprimand me. He says, what did you think you were going to accomplish by doing that? Or maybe some other jestful way to have put that. Did anybody else get that feeling? Is it because there's no God in Israel why you would go to this other God? Which is like a sharp blow to the fact there is a God in Israel, but you're ignoring him. It's the obvious fact. Was I hiding? Is that why you did that? Well, obviously, Ahaziah is following in line with Ahab and everybody else that's following suit on the bandwagon to all the Baals and Asherahs and to this god of Ekron, okay, whom obviously has some sort of connection to Baal worship because his name is Baal-zebub. Bubba. Okay? So I just find it a little bit, I guess a smirk on my face comes along when I see how it is that God is, through prophet Elijah, is asking this question to the messengers. Okay? Just an observation. The messengers returned to Ahaziah sooner than he thought. Obviously, this interception would not have allowed for time in Ahaziah's mind for you to have made it all the way to Baal-zebub, god of Ekron, to inquire him and to come back and tell me, what are y'all doing back so soon, in other words. And they give him what Elijah told them to say to him. That you're going to not leave the bed you're in, you're going to die. Was it because there's no God in Israel that you did this? Okay? And then Elijah is described as having a garment of hair and wearing a leather belt around his waist. Who comes to mind? John the Baptist. Do you remember from the book of Malachi that there was a prophecy before the intermission time of the silent years, the period of 400 years or so between the testaments, that there was a prophecy there toward the end that one would come in the spirit and power of Elijah? Do y'all remember that? And do you remember that one of the answers that was given back to Jesus when he asked his disciples one day in Matthew 16, who do people say that I am? One of the answers was Elijah, because they remembered the prophecy that one day Elijah would return. Okay? And we know that John the Baptist fulfilled that prophecy. It's not that Elijah himself would come back, but the one in the spirit and power of Elijah. What did John the Baptist wear? Camel hair and a leather belt. And although we don't hear what Elijah eats, we're told what John the Baptist would eat. What was it? Locusts and wild honey, right? Locusts and wild honey. So there's the correlation. So the king asked, what did the man look like? And when he's told, he determines that it was Elijah is who intercepted his messengers that were supposed to be on the way to Baal-zebub. So what does he do? He sends a captain along with 50 men to go to where Elijah the Tishbite is, and at this moment he's sitting on top of a hill. And he tells them, go tell Elijah, I'll get it right. He tells Elijah to come down. And let's read verse 10. Somebody. Okay? I meant to also mention that Ahaziah not only recognizes, well, this is Elijah the Tishbite. The instructions include this identification that he has of him. Go tell that man of God. Don't forget that part, okay? Go tell that man of God, come down. So when they get there and Elijah says this, it kind of rings a little bit more, doesn't it, in your ears when he says, hey, if I really am the man of God, may fire come down and consume you guys. Okay, proved a point, but, you know, it's like, who are they going to go tell? They're gone. Okay? So you would think, okay, well, that's the end of that. Ain't going to do that again. Guess what? He does it again. He sends another captain with another group of 50 men. Man of God, come down. If I'm a man of God, may fire from heaven come down and strike y'all dead. I mean, I don't know what that sounded like, but okay. Okay. You'd think you'd learn something here. Okay? I was told if you do something wrong, didn't mean to have the outcome that was expected, it's called a mistake. If you do the exact same thing again, it's called stupidity. Have y'all heard that before? If you keep doing the same thing and getting the same result, you ought to learn something. Guess what? He does it again. A third wave, a captain and 50 men. Something's different this time. What's different? He falls on his knees, and look with me at verses 13 and 14. So the king sent a third captain with his 50 men. This third captain went up and fell on his knees before Elijah. Man of God, he begged, please have respect for my life and the lives of these 50 men, your servants. See, fire has fallen from heaven and consumed the first two captains and all their men, but now have respect for my life. We're going to discuss that in just a little bit, but that's just stating the information. An angel tells Elijah to not be afraid to go back with this captain and the 50 men to go to Ahaziah. Once he's in the king's presence, he basically says the same thing with the question and then the judgment. Is it because there's no God in Israel that you went looking elsewhere? You'll not leave the bed you're lying in, basically, is what he's saying. And guess what? He died, according to the word of the Lord that Elijah had spoken. And then we have this little ending that says, because Ahaziah had no son, Joram becomes the next king of Israel. And it was during the second year of King Jehoshaphat of King of Judah. Okay, there's the summation. Let's talk about this. I've kind of made this light tonight. We only have the one chapter. It's just because I just was wanting to get started on this. What's your first questions or thoughts about this narrative? That's an interesting thought. I've never thought about that. Yeah. Why go ask what's going to happen? Why not go ahead and, I mean, this is your, if you're approaching your deity, if you really believe their deity, I'm not just going to ask for a small thing. You know, I would want healing. That's a good thought. I hadn't even thought about that. Anybody else? Thoughts or questions? What kind of piqued your interest here? Well, let's go with the questions to ponder. What did Ahaziah hope to accomplish by summoning Elijah? Okay. Okay. Possible. We don't know this, but that's a possible answer. It's one thought that I had, but I'd failed to think about, well, why didn't he have this thought of Beelzebub? Anybody else? Could it be that along the line of killing him, he just wants to make a point, stop intervening in my business and mind your own, and try to put him in his place? But, and this kind of jumps ahead to another question, and so I'm going to wait till we get to it to try to tidy that up. Why does Ahaziah keep sending captains and 50 men if they keep being killed from the fire from heaven? Well, you listened to what I said a while ago, right? It was the mistake the first time. The second time it was because he was an idiot. Okay. Maybe the word idiot is probably not like the most tactful word to use. I do think the Bible allows me to use the word ignorant, because ignorance is something spoken of in Bible, and it's kind of based off the Greek idea that Gnostism is the word for knowledge, and the I in front of it is the opposite of knowledge, the not knowing. There's the knowing and there's the not knowing. So there's kind of that connection there, them not knowing, him not knowing. Any other reason why you think maybe Ahaziah kept sending the captain and 50 men? Something to ponder. Well, yeah, that could be the case. However, the third captain knew what had happened to the other groups. Yeah, obviously, this was a bad idea for me to be here. This was a bad idea. And I also get this from the third captain, this humility that he has. It starts off all with humility, falling on his knees. He may not have been willing to go, but knows he has to. He has to follow orders. How many of you have been in the service? You follow orders. Yeah, he knew, I'm in between the rock and the hard place here. And so he's just trying to figure out, how can I do this to beg for my life? And I like how he doesn't just think for himself. He also says, could you spare the lives of my 50 men? These captains had these men, they were theirs. And he cared for them too, just as much as he cared for himself. So I think that speaks something of the captain. And I've got a question or two to follow up with that, about that captain, a little bit later. But I'm still wondering if there's something else to be had in this conversation. Why does Ahaziah keep doing this? Okay, you go next. Okay, you go next. Okay, now it's your turn, knowing that this keeps failing. Mm-hmm. Yes. We're not told this, but we certainly know God has the ability to do this, and did this with Pharaoh, the hardening and softening of a heart. You know, that's possibly going on with this. Um, I mean, how many more captains and groups of 50 men did he have to send after this, you know? I don't know. There's just things to ponder here. Because from a strategic standpoint, if that first attempt failed, I'm thinking I need a different strategy. Yes, that's true. Why does God keep killing the messengers that are coming for Elijah? Making a point. And I know we can often ask the tough question, well, what did they do wrong? You know, those are tough questions. Yes. It was unintended consequences, but it had to happen. When you look at what Jesus said about catastrophe that lands on people, he already busted the myth that bad things don't happen just because you're worse sinners. In Luke 13, he busted that myth. But it tends to happen. Because we're living in a world where we do have freedom of choice, free will, and because of that, we have to live and die by those consequences of bad decisions. Even though I may not have been the one that made the bad decision, Ahaziah made it. And, you know, my captain is leading me into this, you know. Okay, let's go to discussion questions. What makes people think they have to be loyal to their predecessor's belief system? This goes back to kind of what whoever said because of his parents, you know, or because of the role models that he had. His seeking or inquiring of Baal-Bezub, god of Ekron, is taking on the pattern that he had seen before. And I ask that thinking to myself how it's plausible and maybe even probable that he would have known what had gone down at Mount Carmel, that God has the upper hand always, because he knows about Elijah and identifies him as man of God. He knows they lost a battle on top of that mountain that day. Okay, what's the correlation? Well, people today do things simply because, I'm generalizing, but you know this is true. Some people today are doing things religiously simply because that's what their families have always done. You agree with that? I mean, not that we agree that that's right, but we agree that happens, right? And I'm also going to take that a little further. And this may make you feel a little uncomfortable, but that's okay. That's my job as a preacher. Is it possible that people can be raised in the Lord's church today, but are simply doing things with the motivation of nothing more than it's just what my family's always done, and their heart's not really in it? Is that possible? Yeah. It's kind of like where Jesus says, these people come to me to honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. Well, these were Jews that were just going through the motions. And they were emphasizing the exterior aspects of law instead of the heart of the matter. And I love what he says in Matthew 23 and verse 23. He says, you guys have neglected the weightier matters of the law, or the more important matters of the law. Your tithing mint, cumin, dill, and all this other stuff, but you forgot about justice. You forgot about love and mercy and these other things, which is the real intent of why law exists in the first place. Why should you remember the Sabbath to keep it holy? Just to see if you can check off the box that says, I did everything, dotted all the I's, crossed the T's, or is it because you love God and respect Him? And every one of these commandments were that way. Has a heart of the matter to it. That's why Jesus transcends our thinking when he's talking about the Ten Commandments in the Sermon on the Mount. When he would say things like, you have heard that it was said, thou shalt not kill. But I say to you, and that's a template that he uses, right? That's a little format. I say to you, if you have something against your brother, it's like you're a murderer. Now I'm paraphrasing and condensing, but if you've heard that it was said, thou shalt not commit adultery. But if you look at a woman and lust after her in your own heart, guess what? You've committed what? Adultery. These are how he transcended the thinking from just legalistically keeping the law and diving deeper and having meaning to the law. That's what God wants today. Is it possible for me to show up on Sunday morning and I eat that cracker and I drink that juice and I put money in the box and I even open my Bible, and for me to walk out of here without having worshiped at all? Is that possible? It most certainly is. That's why it's important that we do things out of conviction, not just conformity to what was shown to me before. That's kind of the nature of why I'm asking that question. I got preachy there, sorry. Any other additional thoughts to that one, or other answers you want to give to that question? What makes people think they have to be loyal to their predecessor's belief system? I was talking with, I believe it was Jimmy today. We were talking. Were you the one I was talking to about, up in Minnesota? We were talking about in Minnesota. In Minnesota, there's like 36 churches of Christ in the whole state. There's at least that many in the Oklahoma City area. Okay, so that tells you something about the number of people in the Lord's church there in Minnesota, because it has a lot of German people there. Predominantly, what you have in Minnesota are Lutherans and Catholics. And we were talking about how when I was preaching for Hennessy, we did a work in Faribault, Minnesota, and it was, going through that community trying to convert Lutherans and Catholics was plumb near impossible. I don't want to say impossible, but I never saw that we could do it effectively. We did convert some people, but they are from other denominations. They weren't from that, because there's such a strong connection to your roots. Well, plus they're German, right? My wife's family's German. They're also Lutheran, but let's go to the second question here. What does Ahaziah's concern about his future tell us about his injury? This isn't a flesh wound, is it? Get the reference? How many got that reference? It's just a flesh wound. Are you the only one? You and I are the only ones that are Monty Python fans? Okay. It kind of seems like there's some seriousness to this. And did you get it? Okay. Because I got people back here. We have no clue. That there's imminent danger, and probably more than anything, when we went to is it Williamsburg, where we go to the first settlement in Jamestown and all that area. More people, you know what more people died of, the early settlers that were coming over? You know what they died more from than anything else? Infections. And it seemed like every time I turned around, it had something to do with abscessed teeth. Have y'all ever heard that before? More than bullet wounds or bow and arrow spears, it was by infections that they couldn't find off. I think when we think about his injuries like that, we have to remember they didn't have hydrogen peroxide. They don't have a tourniquet. I mean, they probably have some form or some knowledge of what to do to stop bleeding, maybe. But some of us did a Stop the Bleed certification course recently, and there's things you have to do, like within that first 6 minutes or so. But obviously, he had something that would linger and could get worse, and he wants to know. I think it kind of is evidence that his injuries were quite extensive. I think. You all agree with that? Number 3, what point is God trying to make to Ahaziah through Elijah? You know, when he's got that question in mind, was it because there's no God in Israel that you went and did this? What's his point? Okay. You know, God could have just not intervened. Let him go to Beelzebub. Let's see what happens. Let's just let that play out. He's going to die, and, you know, that's the end of it. Or, if he intervenes, look at how many more people get drawn into the story to learn a lesson, or it makes an impactful object lesson. It never was a good thing when the teacher or principal would say, I'm going to make an example out of you. That wasn't very positive, was it? I'm going to make an example out of you. Huh? Unless you, oh yeah, but that never happened with me. But I think it's more impactful, and I think that's a reason why God would have intervened. I mean, I don't presume to know why God does what God does, but I think that's an understandable reason why, you know, he's making a point. What does it say about Elijah that he can so easily be identified by the clothing that he wears as Elijah the Tishbite and as man of God? What does that say about Elijah? Well, he's got a reputation. There's kind of a legacy, or at least a legend that goes around. He might be considered a nuisance from Ahaziah's standpoint, but still, hey, he's a nuisance not to be ignored, right? Yeah. I think the application I'd like to say is our take home here is how important is it that you and I have such a reputation of integrity and credibility and respectability, even though we may be regarded as a nuisance too, or a fanatic or crazy or whatever, but that we have the proof that we're consistent in what we believe in our convictions about God. Doesn't that speak volumes to people? Whether they accept that or not, and if they don't accept that, remember God said, or Jesus told his disciples, when they don't receive you, it's not you they're rejecting, it's me they're rejecting. Okay? You stand up for me and let me be the one they reject or accept. And I think Elijah is kind of in that role model for me to make sure that I do the things that will not bring into question that will cause God to look negative. Whenever we would go out on our youth group outings, as a youth group member myself, I always remember youth ministers or preachers saying to me, remember when you go to that trip in the church van, it says whatever Church of Christ on the side, you represent the church. You know what I mean? And more importantly, you represent God. If you call yourself a Christian, if people know you and where you belong and attend church, then what you do affects the image people can have of that church. And there's evidences of that. Every time I turn around and see a improper thing happening, especially if it's a minister, where it's a minister somewhere, improper conduct with maybe a minor, and you've seen these bits come out in news too, and I don't care what church it is, and I'm going to tell you up front, sometimes that's Church of Christ related, But whatever church it is related, it does give a black eye to that church, doesn't it? It really does. If it happens at the Baptist, I feel bad for that because it also is going to be reflected on me. And I'm not Baptist. But under the umbrella of Christendom, people's view is, I mean, how did we get to the point where people already think of us that we're all hypocrites? You know? It's not a fair judgment, but that is the assessment. So I think it's important that we look at like qualifications of elders and deacons. Must have good reputation. Or we talk about let your conduct be worthy of Christ. Let your walk be worthy of Christ. And Paul wrote that in Ephesians. Or the other things where Peter, for example, says, be holy. That means be separate. For I am holy. I'm to strive to be these things because I realize I'm not just representing myself. I'm representing God. Elijah was called man of God. And I have to walk out of here knowing I'm not just Lanny, Job. I'm Lanny representing a follower of Jesus, a believer in God. And that's important. Anybody else want to comment on question 4? We've already kind of looked at question 5. What kind of impression do you believe Ahaziah has of Elijah? I think we've explored the idea that maybe he thought, well, Elijah could heal me. Or we've explored the thought that I want to kill him. Or we've explored the thought that maybe he's a nuisance. I just got to tell him to stay out of my business to mind his own. But I do think he has the impression that he has to be dealt with. We can't just ignore this. He's getting in the way of my kingdom business. That's probably the intention God had in the first place. Number 6. In your opinion, why was the third captain and his 50 men spared from the fate of the first 2 attempts? And what can we learn from his attitude and his actions? He's not pretentious, is he? He doesn't assume anything. He expects the worst, but hopes for the best. And his approach, when he approaches Elijah, it's almost as if he's approaching God himself. Yeah. This is kind of a tail tucked under type of approach. And what he says has probably been well thought out. Did you think about, somebody asked, well, how much time has been between these? Well, I don't know how much time's been between these. What we can conjecture here is that it wasn't enough time to have gone to Beelzebub. Bubba. There wasn't a time for that because they came back too quickly. We just don't know what amount of time that is, and it really doesn't matter, but obviously this is giving this third captain the thought that, how can I do it different? What can I say? And he's probably given thought to what he's going to say and how he's going to approach. And it reminds me of the scene, 2 scenes really. There's 2 scenes. Let's play Bible trivia. The first one I think you're going to get. Who was the one that knew it would endanger their life if they were to approach the king on behalf of the Jews? Esther. Remember she said, if I perish, I perish, or if I die, I die, because you weren't supposed to approach a king when you're not summoned. That was against the law of the Medes and Persians. Okay? The other example of this has to do with a guy who felt his heart break because the walls of Jerusalem were still in disrepair, and he served a king and wanted to approach him and get help. Who would that be? Nehemiah. When he goes to Artaxerxes. Okay? It's just you're walking on eggshell, and you're doing it very humbly. Well, you're falling down on your knees here. What can we learn from that attitude? Well, we should never be presumptuous or pretentious in what we're going in and making demands. I mean, we should always humble ourselves, right? Question 7. What do you think this third captain could have learned from the experience of seeing his king die from the prophecy spoken by Elijah? Remember, he and his 50 men don't die. Remember, they bring Elijah themselves back to Ahaziah. They listen as Elijah tells Ahaziah himself that he's not going to get better, that he's going to die. And then he dies. We know nothing more of this captain and his 50 men, but what could they have learned from this? What do you think would be going through your mind if you were that third captain? There's a point made with him. Again, reminds me of other biblical stories where, Nebuchadnezzar comes out and discovers that these guys that survived the flames, is it Belshazzar with the lion's den story? Is it Belshazzar that was king? Was it Darius? Okay, I can't remember. There's so many of those kings in the Babylonian period, but they both were convinced that, hey, somebody shut the mouths of the lions up, or somehow these three guys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they survived. And there's credit given to God as a result. Do you realize you'll never be able to get people to give credit to God for you doing something wrong? But when you do something right, even if you have to suffer, that's why Peter says, don't let anybody be ashamed when you suffer as a Christian. But praise God that you bear that name. 1 Peter 4:16, I think. And what are some verses that come to mind when you read this narrative? What are some verses that come to mind? Terrell, you're quiet tonight. A lot of you, Sam, you're quiet tonight. Chris, you're quiet. Of course, you're always quiet. Anybody got any verses that came to mind that popped in your head on any of these talking points? Oh, okay, yeah. Which begs the question, where was the other handwriting on the wall? And who was the king? Was that Belshazzar? I think that one was Belshazzar, wasn't it? Because it's Daniel. It's the book of Daniel. Many tekel upharsin, I think is what was written. Okay. Any other verses or other stories you were reminded of? I mean, what's the moral of the story with a verse? Well, I think an obvious one is, you shall have no other gods before me, for I am a jealous God. Exodus 20, verse 3. Well, that's the Old Testament. Oh, okay, sorry. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, strength. Or Matthew 6:33. Seek first Beelzebub? No. Seek first kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these other things will be added to you. How about humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, and he will do what? He'll lift you up. These are some of the verses that come to my mind on this narrative. Yeah, no one can serve two masters. Why? You'll end up loving the one and hating the other. That's why you can't serve both God and mammon, or God and money. You got to choose. Got to choose. I get the impression, and I don't stand here saying to you today that I'm 100% convicted that this is exactly what happened, but I get the impression that the third captain learned something that day of a valuable nature and hopefully took it to heart. Don't y'all? I don't know that for a fact, but boy, the opportunity for him to have learned it was right there in front of him. Any other verses that come to mind? All right, things to consider. This is our conclusion points. Did you read the first one? Be careful when you're in upper rooms with lattice. Hey, that's a good point. Lattice I see is not very strong. It's really thin strips of wood, isn't it? And, given on how much maybe a person weighs, I'm not going to lean up against the lattice wall, that's for sure. Well, could have been. We should always inquire of God in regard to our future health, safety, and well-being or welfare. God does not like sharing deity with other so-called gods, does he? You saw me do a little magic trick right there at the beginning of class. Some of y'all did. But have y'all seen me do the magic trick while I have a green ball, a yellow ball, and a red ball? And the red ball is representative of God, and the yellow represents fun in the world, pleasure. It's kind of like Ecclesiastes, everything under the sun is but vanity. So it's that hedonistic lifestyle. And the green ball, green is the color of selfish traits like envy, greed, jealousy, and money, the love of money. And so the tube that's on the outside has like a traffic light, the green, the yellow, and the red. And I demonstrate that that's how people try to order their life. They put self first. They're following eat, drink, and be merry philosophy, and they put God in last place. But when I remove the can, the red ball's first. And how many of you have seen me do this trick? Okay. My point in doing the trick is that God will not accept second place or last place. He always deserves first place. That's the point that I try to make. And no matter how you order it, red is always going to be first. And then there's another little box. I put that red ball in that box and it disappears, but it shows back up in the can as being first. No matter what you try to do, God will not accept anything less than first place. So I think that's a point being made here. Yes. Mm-hmm.
It won't, they won't fit. And so then I poured the rice out, put the ping pong balls and what was God in there, and there was 4 of them. And then you pour the rice back in. It shows that if you put God first, there's still room for all these things that you want because the rice will fit back in there.
Yes. And it's not really a magic trick, but it's a great object lesson. I've done the very same thing because I copied what I saw it done before. A preacher had a mason jar, and he had it filled up with M&Ms, and he had a little pocket New Testament. Remember how those were so popular back in the day? Some people used to refer to them as ministers' New Testaments, and it always came with Psalms and Proverbs. I always liked that. And I could roll mine up, and I would have the M&Ms first and try to put the Word of God in there, and it wouldn't fit. But if you poured out the M&Ms and then you rolled up your Bible and put it in there, you could pour all those M&Ms back in and they'd fit. The M&Ms would represent the joys of life, all the different things. There's different colors. Same principle. So the point is, the moral of the story is, put God first, or put God's Word first. That's it for this lesson. I hope, maybe, did y'all have any other ideas of what this might have been titled other than the title I gave it? the title I gave it was Sometimes You Have to Hear It for Yourself. Huh? Third time's a charm? Okay. Third time's a charm. That has a bell. That rings a bell. Yeah. Third time's a charm. Yeah. I like that. I may change that. All right. Chapters 2 and 3, and we're going to see the last of Elijah in this next story. It's called, if you think of the title, it's like two titles. I can't remember. Up and Away is the first part. And, okay, yeah, I can't remember. My memory, I tell you what, I've had several roadblocks in my memory this past week. I've had mental blocks. Is that a sign of getting old? You can stop streaming. Thank you for joining us. Y'all probably have heard the story where the